Thank you, Madam Chair. Earlier today, we heard from survivors of the Club Q nightclub shooting in Colorado Springs and the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida. I certainly look forward to a day where people do not have to relive their trauma in order to compel action. But I am grateful for the survivors who spoke today. Thank you for turning the deep pain and trauma that you've experienced into purpose. Hearing these accounts today was heartbreaking, and we know that your lives have been changed forever. In response to this tragedy, the fact that you have come here displaying great dignity and poise in the midst of it all certainly makes this institution better, and we thank you. Now, in stark contrast, we have Republicans in state legislatures across this country who continue to introduce and pass legislation undermining the rights of LGBTQ people, despite clear evidence that these tactics cause violence and loss of life. Certainly here in Congress, we don't need to be reminded that hate speech leads to hateful violence. January 6th was certainly evidence of that. Now, in my congressional district, healthcare providers have experienced threats and attacks that have disrupted their provision of medical care to the LGBTQ community, who are already disproportionately facing barriers in accessing healthcare. Dr. Meyer, how do LGBTQ plus individuals disproportionately experience health inequities?
Thank you. I think the challenge for LGBTQ people in seeking healthcare is that providers are not qualified enough or not knowledgeable enough. And this is particularly true for transgender individuals across the country who report that when they go to see a provider, often they're the ones who have to teach the provider about transgender care and give them resources to help them help the patient. I think that the other side of it is that LGBTQ people also experience greater mental and physical health problems resulting from prejudice and discrimination, and therefore need those services even more so.
Thank you, Dr. Meyer. And what we have seen is a policy violence in nearly half of the states in our country, which have introduced 43 bills this year alone that only would deepen those inequities, particularly for transgender people, by restricting access to gender-affirming care, including 4 states that have enacted total or partial bans. And Republicans in the House have introduced similar bills to block access to this necessary and appropriate medical care nationally. Ms. Hunt, why is gender-affirming care so vital for transgender people?
Thank you for shedding light on that. So one of the things that we see most often in trans people's lives is a very high experience of negative mental health outcomes. People will have extremely high level of severe depression, suicidal ideation. There are a lot of numbers that have floated around in social media spaces for years, sourced back to some of the surveys that we did 7 and 14 years ago, specifically on these subjects. And one of the things that we've found in subsequent studies done by several organizations, including the Trevor Project, is that just providing access to transition-related medical care reduces the significant negative mental health outcomes for transgender youth by nearly 2/3. When we have a treatment that is just that effective in improving people's lives, it is fundamental that we need to make sure that everybody who needs that care is able to access it. This is something that improves and is necessary for trans people to fully participate in society. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Transgender individuals deserve to receive essential life-saving gender-affirming health care, and our medical personnel should be able to provide it without fear of being attacked. Last month, I joined colleagues in sending a letter to the Department of Justice regarding the violent anti-trans threats that have been made against providers of gender-affirming care and the ways that online platforms are fueling this violence. I just want to close with Mr. Wolf. I believe it is really important to center survivors in our discussion here. So let me close with you. How have these threats impacted you and your fellow survivors personally?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, it breaks my heart because it has resulted in further violence. It's really hard to have gone through something like Pulse and have a desire to make the world a better place and to ensure that no community ever goes through it again, and then to turn around and see it recur, not just in Colorado Springs, but really around the country. So I can say that it's been a very challenging time for people in Orlando. It's a challenging time for survivors of violence against LGBTQ people. And I also am grateful for this committee. I'm grateful for this hearing that we're shining a light on what I think is an urgent crisis in the country.